This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. My guest on the podcast this week is John Rowley of Rowley Farmhouse Ales from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Well, you know, we've been friends for a couple of years now. I went down to Santa Fe, I think it was 2 years ago, and went and visited you guys and have seen you at various places and various festivals and whatnot since then. You visited the office a couple months ago when you were up here in town. And then you came up to GABF and had this strange occasion where you won 3 medals, bronze, silver, and gold, and then took home Small Brewpub of the Year awards. And I couldn't have been more happy for you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So we're going to delve into the brewing mind of John Rowley and figure out what what is going on in there. And I shouldn't say just John, because you've got some folks that brew with you there at the brewery too.
Yeah, I've got 2 guys helping me out. Wes Burbank, he used to be the brewer at Crooked Stave. He was a brewer there, and then he came to me. He's been at a couple places before that.
So we're going to talk about the Rowley Farmhouse Ales approach to brewing. But before we do that, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. For 25 years, G&D has led the way with innovative solutions for the craft brewing industry. Contact G&D Chillers today at 1-800-555-0973 or reach out online at gdchillers.com. Mention the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast and you'll receive up to $1,000 worth of glycol with the purchase of any new G&D chiller unit. Also, stay connected to the heart of craft beer and the revolutionary tastemakers behind every can and bottle. Download the free Tavour app to get highly rated independent craft beer delivered right to your door. Recent featured beers include Within Us from Anchorage, Stargate Nectarine from Black Project, King Sue from Toppling Goliath, Ninja vs. Unicorn from Pipeworks, and one of my personal favorites, Bière de Paix from Side Project. Get $10 in beer money today with code BREWING.
Shit, I didn't know that. Get free glycol.
I know, right?
I mean, I have a G&D chiller. Send me some glycol.
You bought it too soon.
I bought it.
And I guess you got to upgrade now.
Maybe I have to. I would buy another one. Let me put it that way. Their product is solid.
Yeah.
And then now that I know I can get $1,000 worth of free glycol,
they have been fantastic supporters of the podcast this year. And,
great product.
And everyone that I've talked to has said the same, from Josh Freem to Vinny Chilurzo.
We're real happy with our chiller.
Yeah. So, John, give me a little bit about your brewing history. Kind of walk me through how you got to where you are right now with Rowley Farmhouse Ales.
So I started out as a home brewer. Let's see. I brewed my first batch of beer in 1988. So that kind of dates me a little bit. But I didn't really stick with it. That was kind of an experiment in college, buddies of mine. But we were drinking like stupid beer in 1988. Milwaukee's Best.
Sure.
Old Milwaukee, whatever the cheap shit was on sale was probably what was going around our dorm room. And one day this guy, Steve, who I used to know really well, I haven't seen him in a long time, but his father was homebrewing. He brought a cherry chocolate stout, and I think he stole 3 or 4 bottles of it and brought it over to our dorm. And it was a magical beer. It was fantastic. And so we stole quite a bit of it from him. And over time, he was like, "You fucking kids, come over. I will teach you how to make it." So we actually did. We went to brew with him, and we brewed a few times. And I think they came out okay, not as good as his.
Yeah.
But we were not really that much into it at that point.
Right.
Life goes on. Fast forward, I started brewing more in 2007.
Okay.
In between that time, I read a little bit here and there about it. And I think it was a Sam Calgione book ended up on my desk somehow at work. Like a stupid little how to homebrew book. It was mostly extract stuff. But I was looking at it and I'm like, I think we should start doing this. A buddy of mine, Kale, he had a really nice homebrew kit that his wife wouldn't let him use. And so we were hanging out at a local brewery in Santa Fe, having some beers. And he said, "Hey, Rowley, man, you're a chemist. Why don't you brew some beer?" I'm like, "Well, I've brewed a few times. I'd love to. I just don't have the kit." And he's like, "Oh, I can solve that problem." And he brought all that stuff over the following Saturday, and we started brewing. And I got the bug bad.
Yeah.
And so I upgraded all that stuff and started putting my head into it.
Yeah.
And paying attention to what we're doing and growing the process. It's about developing a process.
Right.
I developed my process and then, got serious about it and just made more and more beer. And the hard part at the end of that is trying to find people to drink it. Because I can only drink so much.
Right.
I'm pretty good at that, but I'm not that good at that.
Sure.
And so, at some point you have to say, okay, let's open a brewery. Because, especially when you get into barrel aging.
Because if I'm going to start making all this stuff,
you can't have.
I need to be able to recoup some of what I'm spending on it.
Well, that's that's part of it for sure. But the passion part is more fun to me. If you have a garage full of beer and you have maybe 8 or 10 barrels in your garage, that's probably a problem. So let's move that to a professional scale.
But just because you like to do that doesn't mean that there's a viable business that comes from it. And so that's another leap for you then to say, hey, just because I like making this doesn't mean that there's going to be people that want to buy it and that this business is going to be successful. How'd you go about creating a plan for, a business that could ultimately be, smart and sustainable?
So I can't say that was all me because that would be incorrect. I'm the kind of the passion side of it. And then I have a partner, Jeffrey. Yeah. He's the level head. Okay. And so I met Jeffrey in probably 2011, I think. So for that, backtrack a little bit, our homebrew club in Santa Fe called the Sangre de Cristo Craft Brewers. I was deeply involved with that club for a long time. Yeah. I still do a little bit for them. I was the president for maybe 10-ish years. But as a brewer now, I don't have time to do that and my normal day job, all that stuff. I can only do so much. So the club used to brew at Santa Fe Brewing Company, where on Saturdays they had a small batch brewing kind of thing where people could bring their homebrew gear, use their hot water. They provided PBW, Star Sand, that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, super nice. And it created a really nice community. Yeah. And people would come together on Saturdays and especially on the bigger ones like Learn to Homebrew Day. Right. Things like that. We'd have a really large crowd. But on any given Saturday, you'd have 2 or 3 guys hanging out, brewing beer and kind of bouncing ideas off each other and trying to make fun beer for everyone to drink. One of the cool things they would do is they would actually put the beer on tap. Huh. So if you brewed a beer you liked and you told them, hey, can you guys put this on tap? Small batch Saturday, they would do it. I don't know how legal that is. Or was. The laws might have changed. But
did all the beer ferment there? I don't know.
It was all, technically fermented there. So I think it is legit. But yeah, we brewed a lot of different beer. Yeah. And a lot of different ideas were exchanged and a lot of fun things happened. It was a really good kind of time for everyone, I think. And we learned a lot doing that. So that kind of led into brewing for me. Like I met Jeffrey at that time. We became friends through bottle sharing and just drinking each other's beer. He wasn't a brewer, but his wife at the time was visiting places like Perennial. Side Project wasn't quite open yet, I think. But she's a traveler by design. Her job puts her all over the country. So, she brought us a lot of fun beer that we would never see in New Mexico. Right. I think we were really blessed in that sense that we got to taste, hundreds of beers that we probably wouldn't have gotten otherwise. New Mexico at that time was sort of a wasteland with beer. That's why we were brewing to begin with. We're like, okay, you're not going to get, dry hopped mixed
Well, I mean,
fermentation
2011,
sours.
2012, 2013, like a lot of the country was that way.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
There were pockets of creative brewing. And I mean, there were fantastic breweries all over the country, but some of the creative stuff that you
Yeah,
were
but people were
seeking
brewing
out.
like black IPA and,
Right.
whatever boring styles they were brewing. That wasn't happening everywhere. But New Mexico was one of those places.
Right,
And
right.
we were lucky to try a lot
and
of
sour
stuff.
beer in general brewed in the United States was not a very common thing, no matter where you were.
No, definitely not. And that was around the time I got the sour bug.
So you launch Rowley Farmhouse Ales, and you'd focus on farmhouse beers, on sour beers, on acid forward beers, and not sour beers in multiple different ways.
Yes.
Both traditional barrel aged, sometimes now spontaneous, but also acidified beers that are done through more brew house processes.
Yep.
And you produce all of these types of sour beers and release them in different ways. But you're doing it in a relatively small market that was maybe not as developed or savvy for this kind of beer. That had to seem like a little bit of a risk.
It's definitely a risk.
Okay.
It's a big risk. And the good news is that the people in New Mexico have taken a liking to it. I have to thank Santa Fe Brewing for kind of opening that door a little bit, because they did a few beers. They had a brewer, Leif. He used to do like the Creek. You might remember that. They brewed that beer in 2013, 2014, and 2015.
I do remember that beer, yeah.
They did a Oud Bruin also. I think before that they made a few other sour beers that were a little weird. Like they did a sour porter, which wasn't really a big hit. But they did want to do sour beer from maybe 2013 to 2015. They put a lot of effort into it. They put a lot of barrels in their warehouse. The brewer left to go somewhere else, and at that time the project kind of failed. So not because of they just didn't have anyone to do it.
Right.
The current staff or the staff at the time, they weren't.
Just didn't have a passion for it.
They didn't have a passion for it. The brewmaster changed. He's not into sour beer.
Sure.
So
they had gone through the trouble of trying to market and build up some demand for this kind of style of beer.
I think they definitely started the trend there in that respect.
And then just kind of stepped out of it and left an opportunity. They
left the door open for me. I was going to do that anyway, but
sure.
My plan had started around that time as well. It just, you have to meet the right people.
Right.
I knew Jeffrey at the time. We didn't really talk about it at first. I had some other plans with some other people that weren't as solid, I think.
Yeah.
And then over time, I started talking to Jeffrey, and a lot of it was his circumstances as well. It became a more common thread probably 2015-ish.
Yeah.
And then we started working on a business plan. We talked about it, and and finally we got our shit together and we opened a brewery in 2016.
So you opened this brewery, and how have things been since then?
Things have been good.
Okay.
Then really good. We've come a long way. We started out with a 42-gallon setup.
Yeah.
So a Blickman 3-tier, not a big deal kind of thing, with basically a big homebrew setup. Our idea originally was going to be contract wort brewing through Santa Fe Brewing. Mm-hmm. But then when we were starting our build out, we got a call about a 7-barrel brew house down in Albuquerque that was sitting there. And so we bought it. We're like, all right, we're going to throw a little caution in the wind here and buy the brew house. And that was the best decision we've ever made.
Yeah.
Because not that Santa Fe Brewing wouldn't be good wort, but it would just be challenging to coordinate with them because they've grown so much. In the past few years. This year they were brewing 1,100 barrels a week, and 450 barrels of that was their 7K IPA. And so there was no way they were going to squeeze us in.
Right.
So we would have been kind of left hanging without wort if we had gone down that road.
Sure.
And really, there's not a lot of contract opportunities in New Mexico.
Right.
So for us to have gotten the 7-barrel system was a big win for us. We paid $19,000 for that. So think about that. I mean, that's cheaper than any Chinese piece of shit system that you can get anywhere. You know, you can buy a Chinese setup for 50 grand or something, you know, brewery in a box kind of thing. That's cheaper than that. It's hard to believe, but it is. And it's old school American stainless.
All right.
So we can be proud of that.
Yeah, you know, when you do it that way, of course, it has different engineering requirements. You do not necessarily have the support of someone to help you figure out how to put all of this stuff together.
No, luckily we're good enough to figure that out on our own.
Yeah.
I have a good background in mechanical stuff as a chemist.
Right.
My job during the day is building experiments. So if someone comes to me, they say, I want to do this, help me do that. So I set up the experiment. I don't typically run the experiments, although I have in the past. So I'm sort of an engineer.
Right. I'm
more of a chemist, but I do a lot of engineering by default. I call it OJT, on the job training. So I've done that for almost 19 years. So
you work in a fairly auspicious laboratory, do you not?
I do. I work at Los Alamos National Laboratory, the home of the first uranium and plutonium bombs that changed World War II. So that's a very auspicious place to work. They have a very rich history.
Right. Let's switch gears and talk a little more about how you think about and how you design and how you build processes to make some of these beers. But before we do that, balancing barley and hops is your expertise, and for Clarion Lubricants, food grade lubricants is theirs. The team at Clarion knows that when it comes to making great beer, you're the expert. And when it comes to supplying food grade lubricants backed by service-oriented professionals, they're the experts. Clarion will work with you to create an efficient lubrication program that helps protect your brewery. To speak with an expert, dial 1-855-MY-CLARION, that's 855-692-5274, or visit clarionlubricants.com. Clarion Lubricants, the expert that experts trust. Also, whether you're a full-scale production brewery, a tap room, or a home brewer striving for the ultimate setup, October Can Seamers has the small-scale canning solution. They've proven that breweries increase revenue through to-go sales with October Can Seamers, and everyone loves to sell more beer. You're only a few clicks away from selling more beer. Just head over to octoberdesign.com/podcast. That's October with a K, and use offer code JAMIE. That's JAMIE to save $50 on any Can Seamer purchase. It was so nice of them to make that code name it after me.
I have one of those too.
You do?
I got one of the very first ones.
Okay.
It's an awesome machine.
I actually, we canned a Brewers Retreat run of beers. And so we've hand canned, 400 cans.
Nice. It's not pleasant.
No, one by one hand canning was not pleasant. The October Seamer worked seamlessly. There's a terrible pun for you.
That's awesome. It is a great machine. And ours has been going now for maybe 2.5 years.
Okay.
I had to change the main bearing once, I think, but other than that, it's flawless.
Well, that's
seamless.
High praise. Oh, there you go. So let's talk a little bit about some of the beers that you've made that have gained some notoriety on the national stage as a result of winning some medals. Now in 2018, after being open for just under 2 years, you send some beer off to the Great American Beer Festival. You win a medal for your Germophile.
Yep.
Berliner Weiss.
It's a Berliner style Weiss beer.
Okay. And then in 2019, you send another stack of beers out to the Great American Beer Festival, and you win 3 medals for it.
3 medals, yeah. That was a pretty epic event, I have to say.
Yeah.
I would recommend that highly to anyone who gets the chance.
Put it in your marketing plan, folks. Year 3, win 3 medals and Small Brewpub of the Year at Great American Beer Festival.
A lot of that is luck. Luckily, I'm Irish. And that's helped a lot because we have luck.
So, winning at a festival like that and winning 3 medals in sour beer categories is more than luck. That speaks to having an approach for what you do. So let's talk a little bit about that. And maybe we start talking, with some of the quicker sour processes.
Okay.
And some of your kettle sour beers. Now, Germophile is one of those, and Meier is also.
Yes, they're both very similar beer. They're actually not kettle soured.
Okay.
But what we do for Germophile, which is a really simple Berliner style, plain sour wheat beer, we do 50% wheat. You can use malted white wheat. We use raw for that. Sometimes we use other ones, depending on stock availability. I've used Wireman in the past.
Yeah.
I do like the Wireman malt quite a
I'm
bit.
going to crack a can of it here while we talk.
Go for it. The it's not a crazy beer. It's 50% wheat, 50% Pilsner malt, and it could be Continental Pils. It could be, it really depends on what we can get at the time. We usually use raw for that because it's a core beer. We don't go too crazy. And what we do for that is we do a live lacto fermentation.
Okay.
So instead of a kettle sour where you put it in a kettle and boil it after it's been soured, I don't do that because we're already dedicated to sour beer.
Right.
If you're a clean brewery and you're not worried about, and you are worried about maintaining a certain level of sanitation, then kettle souring is for you. If you're like us and you really don't care because, we have a process for that already, we're going to do a live lacto fermentation. We're not going to reboil it after it's been lacto fermented. Then we're going to pitch some sort of sac into it to finish it off because the lacto is only going to give you sourness. It's not really going to give you alcohol.
Yeah.
That beer has no hops. So we use the Lactobacillus plantarum. We've used many sources of it. People have tried Good Belly. That's kind of the milk the funk method. I've found that there's a new product from, what is it, Lallemand, I think? Mm-hmm. They have a Lactobacillus plantarum powder.
Okay.
A dry form. I've started using that because it's more shelf stable.
Okay.
The Good Belly is nice because it's relatively cheap. I think as a wholesaler, you can buy 6. So we were using 18 liter pitches of the mango.
Mango Good Belly.
The mango Good Belly.
Okay.
We're using that for a while, basically because it was cheap.
Right.
And it was available. The problem
if you
with
got
that,
a pinch, you could run down to your local Target or Walmart.
You can do that. That's a pain in the ass. But we have as a restaurant, we get we get deliveries every day of food. So there's a local seller that sells Good Belly.
Gotcha.
And we can get it pretty fresh. We can still do that, but the dry powder is roughly the same price. It's probably a little bit more, but it's available. Yeah. And I can keep it on. I don't have to refrigerate it. It's you can refrigerate it. I mean, people do refrigerate it, but I mean, it's got like a crazy 2-year shelf life or something like that. And they guarantee the purity. It's worked out fairly well. So you'd make a starter
imagine
with
that.
that.
Lallemand's purity is a little different than Good Belly's purity.
I think
on this.
it is. Yes,
Yeah.
I've actually looked at both.
Not that purity is the thing that anyone should have to strive for in this. Obviously,
No, but if there's other things in there that could change the beer profile quite a bit.
From a professional level, if you're looking for repeatability, then
that powder is the way to go.
Yeah.
And the price is roughly the same.
So when we say live lacto, do you throw it in the kettle first before you pitch lacto, or
so we boil it like we would normal,
like
we make a beer as we would normally mash, louder, boil. Then we rack it to our fermenter.
Yeah.
We rack in. We go through our heat X. We go into the fermenter at 100.
Right.
And then we pitch lacto.
Okay.
And then the Lactobacillus plantarum is nice because it'll run from 100 down to 70-ish without any. You don't need to add heat or it'll still work effectively.
Yeah.
Now there's other companies like I'll call out Creature Comforts. They have like a really fast souring lacto. Yeah. That's great. I mean, if you can do that, if you can find a lacto strain that you can buy. Or you can bank. I recommend doing that. But if you can't, and you're just like a small brewery like us, then the plantarum is great.
Yeah.
The only problem with plantarum is it doesn't handle IBUs at all.
Okay.
So we've tried 5 IBUs and it's kind of neutered it, and it'll kind of peter out at like a pH of 4, 4.2.
And this is all happening in a no oxygen environment in the tank, or are you?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
No oxygen. We pre-acidify to 4.4. And we don't do any oxygen exclusion. We tried that in the beginning. It's more effort than you need to. But if you pre-acidify with a phosphoric acid or lactic acid, food grade lactic, the phosphoric is cheaper.
Yeah.
It's a little more harsh, but you're not using much.
Yeah.
So you don't. I think it's about 300 milliliters in a 7-barrel batch to get you from, say, 5-ish to 4.4.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to grow in it. It becomes a hostile environment immediately. So the lacto will just shine. It will take off. And so you want the lacto to sour the beer to roughly 3.2 or maybe a little higher. It depends. It changes. It never goes exactly to 3.2 every time.
Right.
Some days it'll stop at 3.5. Some days it'll stop at 3.4. And part of that could be measurement error. Mm-hmm. We have a pretty good pH meter, but it's still a measurement.
Right.
It's not going to be perfect every time.
Those damn pH meters need constant recalibration.
They need so much love. And the thing is with brewers is they always buy the cheapest pH meter you can buy. As a chemist, I've been buying $1,000 pH meters for years, and they still suck.
Okay.
The electrodes need changing constantly. Yeah. They need to be wet all the time. It's just a hassle.
Yeah.
But it's part of the game.
So you are letting this lacto just kind of run its course and get to where it's going to get. Let it naturally kind of peter out to where it hits a pH level where it's just not going to function anymore.
Exactly. Eventually it'll hit a spot where, and it's usually 24 to 48 hours, it stops.
Okay.
And then at that point we pitch a Saccharomyces strain. We typically use a Saison strain.
Yeah.
French Saison yeast for that. 3711 is the Y yeast number. If you buy BSI, it's S11. We usually get everything from BSI because it's closer, and their lead times are less. So I can get something in a week versus 5 weeks for Y yeast.
Okay.
So I get it. We got to plan it out in advance, but
sure.
Have a fresh pitch, throw it in, and we let that run out. That's usually like a 14-day process.
Okay.
And then it'll finish up real nice.
When you say that, naturally my mind is thinking, what temperature are you fermenting that at in order to not, and what are your pitch volumes like so that you are not, stressing yeast and producing a lot of esters?
Yeah, we're using an actual, I think what they use is 1 million cells, I think. I can't remember what it is. 1 million cells per milliliter or something like that.
Okay.
It's a normal pitch rate. We're not trying to stress it out. And then just let that run its course. We don't oxygenate the beer when it has lacto in it.
Okay.
The lacto doesn't like that. You can do it. I've tried that before, and it doesn't hurt it too badly. But what I found is there's this essence of lacto, and you can kind of get that in some beers, but in the kettle sour beers you can't. A lot of that stuff gets boiled off. It's volatile. It's gentle. It's soft. It doesn't stay. I try to keep that there.
Okay.
That's a big thing for me, I think, is that lacto kind of yogurtiness, if you will. There's this essence of lacto that is in these kind of beers that is not in kettle sour beers because you boil it off.
Are you saying that oxygen also negatively impacts that then too?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Not as much as boiling it. Boiling it definitely does it. But, if you have restrictions, then you have to boil, that's fine. I'm not trying to say kettle sour beers should die down or anything. There's a place for every process. And so our process doesn't include that. Your process may include that. It depends on what you're doing. We're all in on sour beer, so we don't have to worry about that.
Realistically, there's not that much difference between what you're doing and what someone is.
They're very close.
They're not. Yeah,
they're very close. But the devil's in the details.
Sure.
And so I focus on the details.
Absolutely. I find it interesting that you're pitching, a Saison yeast now into that beer, fermenting with it, but without oxygenating.
Yeah.
What does that cause your fermentations?
So that'll finish out the beer. it'll finish out the beer in actually a fairly clean way.
Okay.
So you're not stressing the Saison yeast. Saison yeast is really good because it likes that lower pH range.
Yeah.
You could try to use Chico. You could try to use other strains that are, but the problem with those is they're not pH tolerant. They don't like to be in that range, typically. And I think Mike Tonsmeier did a paper on that once.
Right.
He showed a bunch of different strains and how they tolerated. Even the Saison yeast is probably not the best, but it works pretty well, in my experience. There probably are others that handle that. Brett will definitely do it really well.
Right.
But in a beer like Germophile, we're not trying to Brett it.
Sure.
It may get some Brett just because we have a less than clean environment and there's a lot of Brett around. In our wood, it's in our ceiling, it's in all of our space. It can get that. It's typically not what we're shooting for with that beer.
Okay.
But traditional Berliner Weiss had Brett in it.
And you're not really like mass packaging that beer, right?
No, we sell it mostly on draft.
Yeah.
We are going to do some cans of it.
A couple of these little cans canned on an October Seamer, right?
October Seamer, right there. We actually call those Rowlers.
Okay.
Because we don't want to pay Oscar Blues to use their name, Crowler.
Okay.
Because it's good for them for making money off intellectual property. But that's fine. We like this format better.
Okay.
Because the cans are available.
Yeah.
And you just drink it at once.
I mean, this is a 16-ounce can.
It's a 16-ounce
can. It's not a Crowler.
It's not a Crowler.
It's a Rowler.
It's a Rowler. That's what we call it.
Okay.
But yeah, when we actually bought a small canning line, and we're going to start canning that.
Cool.
We're not going to call them Rowlers anymore because it's actually
they're just cans.
It's just cans now.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
But in this kind of environment, having a little bit of Brett cross contamination
for that beer, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. For an IPA, maybe not as much.
Right.
Although Brett IPA is a thing.
It is for sure. Talk to me a little bit about Meier. Now, this is a bit of a riff on that kind of live lacto fermentation
it's
with a little
very similar beer.
And this is a gold medal winner from this year at GABF. That's what I'm drinking right now.
Nice. Yeah, you're lucky. I don't have a glass of that, but that's okay.
Here, I'll go get you a glass.
I've had plenty of it. You drink it up. The Meier is a very similar beer. It's essentially the same, except for we do instead of acidifying the water. So I didn't talk about that earlier, but we pre-acidify our water to 5.75 before we start, and we'll do the whole batch of water for both the mash and the lauter, just because it's easier to do it all at once.
Yeah.
Some people do just the mash, but when I was at Sierra Nevada, they insisted that just pre-acidify everything and it works better. And I can't argue with that kind of experience or that kind of volume. I mean, those guys know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that was a kind of a thing that I've done since on homebrews and on our batches now, and I think that works pretty well. So instead of doing that, we use RO water because New Mexico water isn't great.
Yeah.
Especially Santa Fe. Santa Fe has a weird setup. There's 10 or 12 different wells throughout the town. And so the city will just say on any given day, they're going to switch from one well to another. And they don't tell you this. And so other breweries have struggled with this because they'll use city water and then they'll filter it. But then they'll get this huge bolus of chlorine and chloramines coming through at once. And it happens on a single day that you don't know. And then if your filter is any bit old and hasn't been maintained or is struggling in any way, it just comes through.
Gets overwhelmed, yeah.
And so I just didn't want to deal with that. So I set up a contract with a guy in town that does RO water.
Okay.
So he delivers me water. It's kind of a pain.
Delivers you water.
Yeah, because, I don't have to pay for the maintenance of a RO system.
Yeah.
He does. He guarantees the quality of the water.
Okay.
We measure the water coming in. It's usually the same every time. So I know he's doing a good job. He delivers water. He's got a big truck full of water. We pump it into our tanks. We have 2 holding tanks we use. One's our mash or our hot liquor tank. Another's an overflow tank. So if we want to do back-to-back batches, we'll fill them both up. And that happens sometimes, not every day. But for a couple batches, we do back-to-back. So we'll need enough water to do those twice.
Yeah.
The germophile and the Gose are not. Those are single batches we do. So usually you can get away with like 300 gallons of water for a 7-barrel batch. So he'll deliver the water. We'll, on our normal beers, pre-acidify them, and then we'll mineralize them to style. So if you want to make a German Pilsner, you wouldn't add very much minerals at all. If you wanted to make a Berliner Weiss, it's similar. It's a little bit. It's probably like 75 ppm of calcium. And, we don't use the magnesium or anything like that. Just usually calcium chloride on those beers. Pretty simple. For IPAs, you want to get a little more sulfate forward. So we'll use a mix of chloride and sulfate on the hazy styles. The West Coast would be more sulfate heavy.
Sure.
So we can tune the water because we have our water.
Sure.
And it's not hard. I mean,
yeah,
a lot of home brewers do this. And I learned, I had an RO system at home.
It's not hard. Is that a water joke?
No, I mean, it could be. It could be. Yeah. A lot of our beers are on the softer end of the hardness scale. We're not making Burton style ESBs and stuff like that. So, 100, 200 ppm maybe at the most. My brewer Wes really likes to lean into that more than I do. I try to tell him, you don't need a lot of minerals. You just need enough for the yeast health. And sometimes you have beers that are over mineralized. They taste metallic. They taste chalky in your mouth. And I'm trying to lean away from that.
Right.
I'd rather have a softer feel because you're going to get a hard feel from a lot of acid anyway.
Yeah.
So back off on the minerals. Let the acid kind of shine a little bit.
No, that makes sense.
But on the Meier, we use 50 pounds of Meier lemon to acidify the mash.
Okay.
So instead of acidifying
That's a weird
water,
process.
It is a weird process.
You throw cut up lemons into your mash in order to acidify?
We cut 50 pounds of lemons in half, and then we toss them in the mash. At the same time, the grains go in. Well, the grains go in first, and then the lemons go in. 60-minute mash.
From a production standpoint, that sounds like a giant pain in the ass.
It is a giant pain in the ass. But
that's brewed the hard way.
Yeah, we have a kitchen, so we tell those guys, "Hey, come over here, cut this shit." It's awesome. A lot of farmhouse breweries don't have kitchen support.
I can
we have
see
kitchen
that.
support, so the fruiting stuff is actually pretty nice.
Okay,
I can tell the cooks, "Hey, I need you guys to pit all these cherries." Whatever 200 pounds of cherries, get to work, and they'll do it. They don't say it doesn't bother them.
Wow.
They relish in it. They're like, "Oh, really? We're helping you make beer?" I'm like, "Yeah, you're helping me make beer."
So what, from a sensory standpoint or from a brewing standpoint, what do you get that is different from acidifying, pre-acidifying acidifying your mash using lemons in the mash versus just using lactic acid, to accomplish the same kind of
lactic acid is pretty monodimensional. You're going to get tartness, and you're not going to get anything else. But when you mash the lemons, you get all of these rind flavors. You get a lot of different fruit character that you might not get normally. And it works really well. I did a lot as a home brewer. It's a lot easier on a homebrew scale.
Yeah, I can see that.
If you're doing a 20-gallon batch of a grapefruit beer, you can, what's that, 10, 15 grapefruits cut in half. It's not that bad. When you're talking 50 pounds, 100 pounds, that's a lot.
Then it helps to have a kitchen staff.
But regardless, it's a pain in the ass no matter what.
Yeah.
But it definitely changes. It's a unique beer. I mean, it's not going to give you like an over the top lemon character, but it's going to give you these secondary lemon notes that are kind of consistent with a Gose or a Berliner Weiss. I mean, if you read the guidelines in GABF or BJCP even, they'll say, a slight lemon character is desirable in these styles. So when we came up with this beer originally, we're like, oh, well, this is perfect. That's what you want, right?
It's interesting, because, lactic acid naturally imparts a little bit of lemon character, and it just has that, that character which gets perceived that way. Yeah, but you're right. I think there are some like earthier lemon tones to this.
It changes it. Yeah. It's a little more complex. It's more tertiary than it would be if it was just the lactic acid by itself.
Right. And it's also a bit, I guess there's more of a smoothness to the lemon character to it.
It is. It is more smooth.
Lemon can often come across as very sharp and have a really distinct edge to it. And this one, sharp. The edge is there, but it just kind of it rolls in a little bit.
It's a little smoother. Citric acid is a sharp acid in my experience. Like if you're using it for any kind of brewing process, it lends to a sharpness.
Yeah.
And I think that's common with lemons, limes, grapefruits, any of the citrus fruits. Maybe not orange as much, but that's a little sweeter.
So 14 days is what you say for fermentation through this process?
Yeah. So we sour it for the same.
You keep it at a normal.
Yeah. So we start at 100 through the heat X into the fermenter, pitch the lacto. That'll go for 24 or 48 hours, and then pitch Saison yeast. And then let it ride. We usually try to keep it below 77 with the French yeast. The cap for that yeast is around 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's not going to be crazy phenolic, like especially if you use the right pitching rates. If you underpitch it, stress it, you'll get phenols. We're trying to stay away from that.
Right.
And we use that yeast more not for the Saison character, but for the acid tolerance. And it does a good job.
I mean, in drinking it, I would not have guessed.
You can't guess,
that was a Saison yeast.
Yeah, everyone thinks, oh, we use Chico. I'm like, no, Chico's 3711.
Oh, I thought you used Quake yeast.
No, we've tried a little bit of that, not with that beer, but that is highly pitching rate dependent.
Yeah.
We've tried to do some repitching with that, and we've made some pretty awful beer.
Okay.
So I'm not a huge proponent of that yeast yet.
Okay.
I need time to figure that out.
Yeah.
There's a lot of variables with that yeast. It's popular.
It seems to be a pretty hot thing right now.
It's a hot thing, but I'm not on board.
There's another pun, right?
Yeah, it is. It likes to ferment hot. There's an advantage in that. If you can not have to deal with temperature control and have 95-degree fermentation.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit now about some of your, I guess if we call them traditional, style sour beers.
More sour. Yeah, that's the stuff I really like to brew.
And these are longer mixed fermentations with, multiple souring bacteria, generally aged in wood.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about your process around that, from recipe design, through the culture that you've built and how you've built it. And then we'll kind of move on from there.
So I started out brewing those styles was around 2012. I think I started trying to do a little bit with the mixed culture. I tried the commercial stuff, the Rosa layer. I found that stuff is good, but it takes a long time. Then in 2013, I went to Jester King to visit them for the first time, and my mind was blown by their culture. It was just fantastic. I was lucky to visit them for the Atria Rubicite, the first release.
Wow!
And that beer blew my mind. It was so good. I had dreams of it the next day, the day after, and luckily Jeff was so cool. He gave me the case of it to go home with. And
wow!
And it didn't last very long.
Okay.
But that beer kind of changed my my mindset about these kind of mixed culture beers. Instead of trying to use what the labs were giving us, I was going to say, let's try some of this more local stuff. So I tried actually to make a couple of homebrew batches with his yeast, prop it up, grow it up.
Yeah.
However, that didn't work really well for me. I got a lot of diacetyl. That culture wasn't quite working for me. So I started from scratch.
Or whatever the culture was after it had gone through its bottle process, and now you're trying to grow
exactly.
it back up.
I probably fucked it up somewhere along the line. But
I wasn't going to say that, but hey,
you can say that. We're all humans and we make mistakes.
He didn't fuck it up.
He didn't fuck it up. I fucked it up. But that's fine. So I tried to do my own thing where I would say, okay, what about let's try to combine everything that I like about commercial strains and wild strains.
Yeah.
So I took, all the French Belgian Saison yeasts, put them in a mix. I took some Lab Brett. I took some Lab Lacto, some Del Brucchi, and some Bruxellensis, some Lambicus. I made a pretty equal mix, and then I brewed a couple beers with that. And those are okay. And then so I started adding things like I took some flowers from down the street. There was a lavender plant I found, and I cut a bunch of those up. I threw them in some wort, brewed a batch of beer with that, threw that culture in, and kind of just modified it in a more local sense over time. And after about 20 batches of beer, these are all like pretty low IBU Saison type of beers, real simple, maybe 12 IBUs, Mountain Hood hops probably, nothing crazy, and wheat, Munich oats, and some Pilsner malt probably, 5-gallon batches, and I would make 20 bottles at a time, and just drink through those, and try to get a feel for what that gave me, and did that over and over and over. And eventually I got to a great spot where I thought this culture is really good. And so then I sent that culture to BSI, and I had them bank it.
This is when you were a homebrewer. I
was a homebrewer. And
wow.
I told them I'm opening a brewery, which is true.
Yeah.
Not exactly at that moment, but
okay.
I opened an account. I said, this is my mixed culture. I want to save this.
Yeah.
And so then I kind of come back to that occasionally. I still like to do as much development on that and let it go as long as possible. But, these things don't always behave like you want.
Right.
Sometimes the Brett starts becoming phenolic. Sometimes you get flavors that aren't ideal in other ways. I at that point, I'll just kind of reboot, start over. And, I know at least I have a spot to come back to every time.
Right.
And that has worked out pretty well for us. I haven't really played much with that since we've opened, other than just reusing that.
Yeah.
That's something I want to play some more with once we get more into our spontaneous beers, which is kind of a newer thing for us. We've done a couple of those over the last 2 years. I did one in our backyard. This guy from 12 West Brewing, Noel. I don't know if you know him. He has a mobile cool ship. He brought it to my place in February of 2018, and we made a beer with it. And I actually have it here today if you want to try it.
Hey, let's open some up.
It's that one there.
Okay.
It was our 3rd anniversary beer. That's the first release of it. We called it Songs of Our Own. Yeah, so we produced so far 2 batches of mixed the spontaneous fermentation beer. This is the first one. This was aged on tangerines.
Yeah.
This is just a single barrel, so we have actually a lot more of it to work with.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers. We wanted to have a beer, ready for our 3rd anniversary, which was last September. And this is the beer I chose. So this one is actually it's a little more Brett than sour. It kind of leans a little more into the funkiness. There's also a lot of fruit character, so that might kind of hide a little bit of the base beer.
But I mean, I get a general sense as I drink your sour beer, and one of the things that I find so appealing about it is that it has a very mild acidity to it. There is acidity there. Obviously, I'm looking at the label, and
this one's especially soft.
Yeah, this one has a pH of 3.3, and yet that acidity is not assaulting. It's not
no, but if you read the
pronounced
I do the
acidity.
TA measurements also, which is not something everyone does.
Sure.
And this one's 13.6 grams per liter. That's actually pretty low, I think. So we've had some people bring us beer.
Yeah.
Homebrewers to do that test for them because it's a titration. It's pretty easy to do, but not everyone has a burette at home. Not everyone has 0.1 molar sodium hydroxide. You have to have a little bit of stuff to do that measurement. And so we've had beer up to 30 grams per liter.
Really?
From homebrewers. And our highest we've ever had was in the low 20s. And that was pretty sour. I don't know what the commercial scales go to because I'm only working off my own data.
I'm trying to remember back because Jeffers Richardson of
does it, yeah.
Firestone Walker, well, when he was a Firestone Walker, he's no longer there, but had a great presentation on Jeffers' acid trip, which
Nice.
It was a really wonderful way to think about what differing levels of total acidity or titratable acidity in beer, produce for the way that those things express in flavor and how people in a sensory perspective, can react to those. And it changed the way that I taste sour beer. Obviously, one of the core components of that whole thing that he did, and I have to do some more on it down the road because it's a thought experiment and a sensory experiment that everyone should do. Tasting lower concentrations, differing TA levels of lactic in water, so that you get a sense for what these varying acidity levels are.
Yeah, that'd be easy to do.
Very easy. You just understand what your dilution rates are and kind of
that's not rocket
set up
science.
different levels, and then also do the same kind of thing with acetic acid to understand. That's easy enough. It's
That's
just
easy
white
too.
vinegar, right?
At Costco, you can get a gallon of it for $2, $3.
You can go to a store and buy it cheap too, and it doesn't take much. It doesn't even take what you might buy, in a store for that. And so, by doing that, you also get an understanding of, even the way that those acids sit on your palate in different ways. They're
Totally different.
They are completely different in the way the lactic hits your tongue, and that acetic acid kind of sits in the back of your throat.
Yeah, the sensory.
It's a physical experience of those acids that help you kind of differentiate, the difference between those kinds of things. But I remember, we would do samples in about the 5 grams per liter level. And I know that their Berliner Weisses were in that kind of 5 to 7 range. And then
pretty soft.
Yeah. And then, you moved up to that kind of 10 to 12 range for, that next tier of sour, but not overwhelmingly sour beers. And then, in that kind of 17, 18 range.
Yeah, it starts to get aggressive.
Started to get serious. Right. And beyond that, no one should be making beer.
That's the thing. There are, experiences in the past, the Kiwi Upland. What was that? That beer was really aggressive. It's actually a really interesting topic. I really like to talk about both of them, pH and TA, because I think it gives you a more broad picture of the acidity, acid profile of the beer. Some beers are, if you talk about pH only, it's just not enough.
Yeah.
There's a broad picture here, not just one thing.
Right.
So, for sour beer, it takes a while to kind of assimilate all that data and figure out where you want to be. We want to be on the softer side of the coin, just in general, because you can drink the beer more pleasurably.
Right.
Beer that's too acidic is generally going to it will some people won't even drink it. Their esophagus hurts and painful.
So what levers do you pull to keep this acid under control? Is it just a function of the culture, or are you using hops and IBU to move that there?
I know where you're going with that. Our IBUs are pretty low. We're in the 12 to 15 range typically. We use Mount Hood a lot. Styrian Goldings.
That's really low compared to some other folks whose cultures can take 30 IBU or really takes much higher IBUs to kind of control some of these bigger cultures.
I've tried a few experiments like that where we make a 30 to 40 IBU beer. And with my culture, I get almost no acid at all.
Yeah.
So it's not, maybe because I use the Del Brookie in my original experiments, and I haven't tried things like Plantarum in these beers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm kind of happy with where it is. So it's, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing.
Sure.
So I'm not going to really entertain adding more lacto to the culture at this point. And, even if you did, it would be kind of stupid because, the Plantarum especially, you're not going to get any benefits if you're sitting at 12 or 15 IBUs anyway. That culture that specific strain likes very low IBUs or none to make a sour beer. And we already know that from our Gose or Berliner. So it's almost pointless to change it. I'm not trying to make acid.
Right.
I'm trying to make beer. So that's a component of it, of course. And I can't really say I want more acid than where we're at right now. There are companies that make beer that are more acidic, and that's fine. There are people that want beer that's more acidic. I haven't really met anyone in my kind of group, people that talk to me that have had my beers that have said, "Oh, your beer is too acidic." Because that's one thing I focus on, is not trying to be. I've made a couple that I think are more acidic. But at the same time, if it's too acidic, I probably won't release it.
Okay.
I'll say, no, this is not going to be usable, or we'll blend it
down. Yeah.
Blend it down. I mean, I haven't really had a lot of that yet. So, you never know. You never know. That's one thing you can do. You can tune acidity via IBU. We haven't had to do that, but it's an option.
Yeah.
As long as I can rely on my culture to not go crazy, I think I'm okay.
What did you learn through this spontaneous beer process? Since we're drinking this now with tangerines in it, one of the challenges, especially where you are in a very high desert, dry environment, is having enough living airborne culture to produce anything in a kind of spontaneous beer. I've talked to brewers before. Like, I'm not going to try spontaneous beer up here. Like, what's around that we're even going to be able to,
what are you going to get?
Yeah. It can work in some more humid environments where things tend to live longer and hang around. If you take the kind of Belgian approach where they'll spray down their new brew house with the old beer in order to kind of carry some of the continuity of culture around, and you're helping nature along and giving you
Absolutely
what you want and what your customers are going to want.
A lot of brewers are doing that. So I actually bought a cool ship. It's being manufactured right now, a copper 7-barrel cool ship. We're going to put it on a trailer. And so our approach is going to be different. We're going to go to places where we think there will be more indigenous microflora. Okay. And we're going to try to get different flavors from different places.
Sure.
And I know this. I'm not the first person who's done this.
No, you're not.
There's many people have done this.
Right.
And
right.
Part of it for
or
me,
if you're Jester King and your American Solera, you might just drive a cool ship back and forth between the two of you.
And that's great. I mean, if you could pull it off, the thing is space. Like if you have, Jester King, you go upstairs, they have space for a 30-barrel cool ship. That's awesome. It's a awesome space. I mean, I don't have a space for that. Yeah. If I had space, I would probably want to do that because it's more repeatable. But I'm looking at it more as a kind of a let's go check out some new places kind of experiment and see where we can find different indigenous microflora. And see how that affects the beer. Well,
the Arizona Wilderness guys do that, right?
They do that, yeah.
Once a year, they drive up to the national forest.
Yeah, they've done that quite a bit. Yeah. And I haven't had that beer, so I don't know what it is.
Nor have I.
But I think that there is some value in that.
Yeah.
If not, everyone's there having a good time, get to camp out and enjoy the weekend or whatever. So it's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
If the beer comes out shitty, then it's a bad thing. But yeah, so I've got this cool ship coming, so I will be able to do these beers throughout next winter and beyond, or this winter. It's winter now, but I think that for me that's going to be a fun way to try to gather, because I know New Mexico can make some good sour beer in terms of indigenous microflora.
Well, John Rowley, what's next for Rowley Farmhouse Ales?
Well, I wouldn't say we have anything crazy planned. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing, and we're going to enjoy the ride.
Well, congratulations on 3 medals at GABF.
Thank you. That was
running the table with
hell of a day.
Bronze, silver, and gold. And getting to go stand up on the stage 3 times this past year.
That was a lot of fun.
Actually, I guess it would be 4 times because you had 3 medals plus Small Brewpub of the Year.
Yeah, well, they think they gave us the one at the same time. We actually went up 4 times to pick up our friend Nate from Free Will Brewing's metal.
Okay.
So I did go up there a lot.
Well, congratulations on that. The beers are delicious. The state of New Mexico is a gorgeous place that everyone should go visit. Santa Fe is a wonderful town, and I enjoy every time I get to go visit.
I'm
Santa
blessed
Fe.
to call Santa Fe my home.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place. And if it hasn't been on people's visit list yet, then it should be on everyone's.
I hope they
list.
come and visit because we've got good stuff going on. The food's fantastic, and we have Meow Wolf and all the tourist stuff and skiing, and it's a great spot.
Great mountain biking, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, mountain biking is fantastic.
Before we get out of here, for 25 years, G&D Chillers has led the way with innovative solutions. Stay connected to the heart of craft beer with the Tavour app. October Can Seamers is the small-scale canning solution, and Clarion Lubricants is the expert at food-grade lubricants. If you enjoy the podcast, I hope you go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and become a subscriber and supporter of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine and this podcast. We get to provide it for you free every week, 52 weeks a year. Year round, and your support of the magazine is one of the things that helps us do this. Support of our advertisers and sponsors is the other thing that helps us do it, and the support of brewers that are willing to sit here and talk to us about all of their secrets and the way they do it, techniques, and etc. Is also absolutely what makes this podcast possible. To that end, John, thanks for talking to me about how you make beer.
Absolutely, Jamie. I'll come back anytime. Thank you.
If people want to find Rowley Farmhouse Ales, where do they find you?
So we do mostly Facebooking, just because that's kind of the most popular app in our area. So Rowley Farmhouse on, I think it's Rowley Farmhouse Ales. We also have a Twitter page, which I don't really do, but my partners do that. I think that's Rowley Farmhouse Ales. And then Rowley Farmhouse on Instagram, I do that. And there's also the Rowley Funhouse.
The Rowley Funhouse.
Which is more of that's Wes, our brewer. That's his shenanigans.
Okay.
So if you want to see stupid shit.
That's not the latest Meow Wolf installation?
No. There's probably...
Because I want to see that.
The Funhouse is fun, I have to admit. I have nothing to do with that. That's more for his thing.
Gotcha.
But it's all good.
Well, John Rowley, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Jamie. I appreciate you having me up.
Cool. Cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.